Good evening. I'm Roger Hendricks Simon, and welcome once again to Simon Studio Presents. Tonight, I think we have a special holiday treat for you. What would the holidays be without a little story called A Christmas Carol? And right here, live from London, Simon Studio presents in person Mr. Charles Dickens.
Thank you, Roger. Ladies and gentlemen, it's so delightful to find myself among theatre people. Oh. Did you know I narrowly missed becoming a professional person? Yes. The day of my audition, I had a terrible cold and did not think I would acquit myself well. Truth be told, I had cold feet as well, which was just as well, according to some of my more literary friends who would prefer to see me doing nothing more than writing book after book after book after book, never even contemplating crossing the threshold of my study to trod the boards here with you tonight. Oh, but I've always been so keenly interested in theatre, ever since I was a child and had my first bedtime story dramatized to me by a malevolent nurse. So vivid was her recollection of a certain Captain Murderer to my childlike mind, she nearly drove me to an early grave. Later, when I became a court reporter, I used to go to the theatre in London every night I could possibly afford the time or ticket. As you know, the Carol has been adapted in many places, and in fact, shortly after it was published, several kindly producers cheerfully adapted my work for the London stage without the slightest consultation with the author. Since the author is among you tonight, he begs your indulgence as he attempts to essay his own carol. A Christmas Carol. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge himself signed it, and Scrooge's name, well, Scrooge's name was good upon exchange for anything he chose to put his hand to. Marley was as dead as, as dead as a doornail. Dead as a doornail. Do you, sir, know what there is particularly dead about a doornail? Do you, sir? Do you, ma'am? Neither do I. In fact, I might have been inclined to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, dead as a doornail, and my unhallowed hand shall not touch it, or the country's done for. So, permit me to repeat emphatically, Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead, of course. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and Marley were partners for, well, I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event. But he was an excellent man of business upon the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. Now, the mention of Marley's name brings me back to the point from which I started. It must be distinctly understood that he was dead to begin with, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm about to relate to you. Now, Scrooge never painted out the name above the warehouse door. There it stood for years afterwards, Scrooge and Marley's. You see, the firm was known as Scrooge and Marley's, and some new to the business called Scrooge, Scrooge, and sometimes Marley. It was all the same to him. He answered to both names. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck a generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, shriveled his cheeks, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and made him speak out shrewdly in his grating voice. He carried his own low temperature always about with him, and iced his office in the summer, and did not thaw it 1 degree at Christmas time. Foul weather did not know where to have Ebenezer Scrooge. The heaviest rain and sleet and snow could boast of the advantage over Scrooge in, well, but one respect. They often came down quite handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the streets to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, ha-ha! How are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars ever implored him to bestow a trifle. Bestow a trifle. Bestow a trifle. No child ever asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming, they would tug their owners into alleys and up courtyards and wag their tails and look at their masters as if they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? To edge his way along the crowded paths of humanity, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what he liked best. Now, once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, upon a Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to keep warm. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. In fact, it had not been light all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. To see the fog come pouring in at every chink and keyhole, one might have thought that nature lived hard by and was brewing on a large scale. Now, the door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, Bob Cratchit, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of a tank, was copying letters. Now, Scrooge had a very small fire, nothing for such a bitter cold. But Cratchit's fire was so infinitely smaller it looked like only one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. And so surely as the clerk would come in with the shovel, the master predicted it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his comforter and tried to warm himself at his candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. 'Twas the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who had come upon Scrooge so suddenly this was the first intimation he had had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug! Christmas a humbug, Uncle Scrooge! You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do, nephew. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then, Uncle, what right have you to be dismal? Why morose? You're rich enough. Don't be cross with me. What else can I be, nephew, when I live in such a world of fools as this? Out upon you, Merry Christmas! What's Christmas to you but a time of paying bills without money? A time of finding yourself a year older and not 1 hour richer? A time for balancing your books and finding every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you. If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. Uncle Scrooge. Nephew, you keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine. Keep it, Uncle, but you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone, then. Much good it has done you, much good it may ever do you. Well, all the same, Uncle Scrooge, there are many things from which I've derived good, from which I've not profited. I dare say, Christmas among the rest, but I've always thought of Christmas time, when it has come around, apart from the veneration due its sacred name and origin, as a good time, a kind time, a forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. Uncle Scrooge, Christmas is the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women both seem to really open their shut-up hearts freely and to look upon each other and the people below them as if they were fellow passengers to the grave and not just another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And so therefore, Uncle Scrooge, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good and will do me good. And I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. But becoming immediately sensible of his impropriety, he poked his fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Let me hear another sound from you, Cratchit. You keep your Christmas humor by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, nephew. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be cross with me, Uncle. Dine with us tomorrow night. Dine with you? I'd sooner see you in hell first. But why, Uncle Scrooge? Why did you get married, nephew? Because I fell in love, Uncle. Because you fell in love. Oh, that's the one thing more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Well, Uncle, you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon. Uncle, I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon, Fred. I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute, Uncle. But I've made my trip in homage to the Christmas spirit, and so I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle Scrooge, and a Happy New Year. A Merry Christmas to you, Bob. Oh, thank you, sir, and a Merry Christmas to you. There's Cratchit, with 15 shillings a week, and a wife and family talking about a Merry Christmas. I shall retire to Bedlam. Scrooge's nephew, in leaving, had let in another fellow. He was a portly gentleman, pleasant to behold, and he carried books and papers and bowed to Scrooge as he came in. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Marley's been dead these 7 years, sir. He died 7 years ago this very night. Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that, sir, but we have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner. Liberality? What is your business? At this festive season of the year, sir, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provisions for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time, sir. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir. Are there no prisons? Plenty of prisons, Mr. Scrooge. And the union workhouses, are they still in operation? They are. Still, I wish I could say they were not. The poor law and the treadmill are both in full vigor, then. Both are very busy, Mr. Scrooge. Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first. Something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear nothing has. Mr. Scrooge, under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitudes, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. Sir, we choose this time because, well, it is a time above all others when want is keenly felt, and abundance rejoices. Now what shall we put you down for, sir? Nothing. You wish to remain anonymous. I wish to be left alone. And since you ask me what I wish, that is my answer. I don't make myself merry at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I hope to support the establishments I've mentioned, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, Mr. Scrooge, and many, well, would rather die. If they'd rather die, perhaps they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, how do I know that's true? But you might know it one day, sir. It's not my business, sir. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon. Scrooge resumed his labors with an improved opinion of himself, and in a more facetious temper than was usual with him. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness had thickened so that people ran about with flaring links, proffering their services to go before horses and carriages and conduct them along their way. The owner of one scant young nose gnawed and mumbled by frost, as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. God bless ye, Mary, gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. But at the very first words, Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog and even more congenial frost. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived, and with an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to the clerk in the expectant tank, who instantly put on his hat and his coat and was about to leave. You won't all day tomorrow, I suppose, Cratchit? If quite convenient, sir. If quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop you £0.50 for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. Well, please, sir, it's only once a year, sir. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. Still, I suppose all these other fools will be closed. You might as well have the whole day. Be here all the earlier the next morning. I will, sir, and Merry Christmas to you. The office was closed in a twinkling, and Cratchit, with the ends of his comforter dangling below him, went down a slide in Cornhill at the end of a lane of 20 boys, 20 times in honor of its being Christmas Eve. And then he ran to Camden Town, home as fast as he could to play with his family at Blindman's Buff. Scrooge, on the other hand, took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner, Marley. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of a building where they had so little business being. Well, one could scarcely help fancying that they must have gotten lost there playing at hide-and-seek as a little house. It was old enough and dreary enough now, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being let out as offices. Now, it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on Scrooge's door, except that it was very large. Also that Scrooge had seen it night and day during his whole residency in that place, and that Scrooge had as little of fancy about him as any man in the city of London. Let anyone explain to me, if he can, how Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, beheld not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face! It was not an impenetrable shadow like the other objects in the yard, but it had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. And it looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up upon its ghostly forehead, and its hair curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air. As Scrooge stared fixedly at this phenomenon, it became a knocker again. Well, to say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a sensation to which it had been a stranger since he was young, would be untrue. But he put his key into the door, turned it sturdily, walked in and lit his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution and look behind the door, as if he first expected to see Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But all he saw were the screws and nuts that held the knocker in place. So he closed the door with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every office above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellar below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes, no. So he walked across the hall, trimming his candle as he went, and went up the stairs. Up Scrooge went slowly, too, enjoying the darkness. Do you know why? Do you know why? Darkness is cheap. Scrooge liked it. He did pause before he shut his heavy door, and he did walk through all his rooms to make sure that all was right. He had just enough recollection of Marley's face to desire to do that. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table. Nobody under the bed. Oh, nobody in the dressing gown, which was hanging in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Quite satisfied, he locked his door, double-locked himself in, which was not his custom. And thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat and, putting his dressing gown and evening slippers, and sat down before the fire to take his evening gruel. As he leaned back, his glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that communicated for some purpose long forgotten with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with a great sense of astonishment and a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked, this bell began to swing slowly, so slowly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound. But soon it rang out loudly, as did every bell in the building. This might have lasted a minute or half a minute, but to Scrooge it seemed a terrifying hour. The bells ceased together as they had begun, but they were succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if somebody were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered that ghosts were described as dragging heavy chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. It's humbug still, I won't believe it. His colour changed, though, when without a pause it came through the heavy door and passed into his room. Upon its coming in, the dying flame in the fireplace leaped up as though it said, "I know him! Marley's ghost!" Marley's ghost Marley in his pigtail usual waistcoat, tights and boots, the tassels on the latter bristling like his coat skirts, and his hair. The chain he drew was clasped about his middle, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, chains, heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, looking through it, could see the 2 buttons on the waistcoat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said Marley had no bowels, but he did not believe it until now. "What do you want with me?" "Much." It was Marley's voice, there was no doubt about that. Who and what are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Well, who were you, then? You're particular for a ghost." "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. You don't believe in me, do you?" "No, I don't." "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond your own senses?" I don't know." "Why do you doubt your own senses?" "Because, well, a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You might be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are, Spirit." Scrooge was not in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he particularly feel waggish just then. He did it as a means of keeping down his terror. Marley's voice disturbed into the very marrow of his bones. "Do you see this toothpick?" "I can." "But you're not looking at it, Jacob." "Nevertheless, I see it." "Well, I've but to swallow it, and be plagued with a legion of hobgoblins, all of my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug!" "None of worldly mind! Do you believe in me or not?" "I do, Jacob, I do, but why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to trouble me?" "It is required, Scrooge, that the spirit within every man should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. Woe is me! And witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth and turned to happiness." You're fettered, Jacob. Why are you wearing chains?" "I wear the chain I forged in life, Ebenezer. I made it link by link and yard by yard. And of my own free will I girded it on, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Or would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was as full, as heavy as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain." Scrooge looked about him fretfully, fearing that he might be surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of cable, but he could see nothing. Jacob Marley, speak comfort to me, Jacob." "I have none to give, Ebenezer. Comfort comes from other regions, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you all I would. A very little time is all permitted to me. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. Mark me well, in life my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of a money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me." "Oh, you must have been very slow about it, Jacob. 7 years traveling." "The whole time. No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse." "You travel fast, Jacob?" "On the wings of the wind." "They must have gotten over quite a quantity of ground in 7 years. Oh, Scrooge, captive bound and double ironed, not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunities misused. Yet such was I. Oh, such was I." "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob." "Business, Scrooge! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of our trade or but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of our business. At this time of the rolling year I suffer most. Why did I walk through crowds of my fellow beings, with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star, which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light could have conducted me? Hear me, Scrooge! My time is nearly gone. I will, Jacob, but don't be flowery, pray. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, Ebenezer. A chance and hope of my procuring. Thank you, Jacob. You were always a good friend to me. Thank you. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not, thank you. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow night when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The next on the last night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us. When it had said these words, the spirit started walking back towards the window, and the window started raising itself. So by the time Jacob got there, the window was wide open. He beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. Scrooge became sensible of confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. He'd been quite familiar with one old ghost in a monstrous waistcoat, with a monstrous safe attached to its ankle, who tried piteously to help a woman with an infant on a doorstep below. And he couldn't. The misery with these spirits was all clear. They had hoped to interfere in human affairs for good, and had lost the power forever. Whether these creatures faded into mist, or mist enshrouded them, Scrooge could not tell. But they and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. He closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double-locked, as he had locked it with his own hands. He tried to say, "Humbug," but stopped at the first syllable. And being from the fatigues of the day, or the emotions he had undergone, he went straight to bed and fell asleep upon the instant. Thank you for...
Yeah.